Principles of Macroeconomics BECC 133. In previous session, we have discussed about introduction to macroeconomics. It means what is macroeconomics, why we study macroeconomics, and in another session, we have discussed about national income accounting, how national income is estimated with the help of three methods like income method, expenditure method, value added method, why national income accounting is very important, and what is the importance of this national income accounting, and what are the limitations of national income accounting. In today's session, we will discuss about classical and Keynesian system, because in macroeconomics there is a great contribution of J.M. Keynes, means John Maynard Keynes. But before the introduction of Keynesian theory, we must have to understand about classical system of theory of employment. So, classical versus Keynesian. What is the meaning of classical model and Keynesian model? What are the approaches of Keynesian model? What are the assumptions of Keynesian model? And what theories propounded by J.M. Keynes in macroeconomics? So in classical model, flexible prices. It means classical theory in which J.B. Say, Malthus, Ricardo, and J.S. Mill, all these economists are known as classical economists. Adam Smith, you know that Adam Smith is known as father of economics, who gave the first definition of economics in 1776, and Malthus gave population theory or demographic transition theory. Ricardo propounded theory of rent, and J.B. Say propounded the theory that give one thing that supply creates its own demand. J.B. Say said that supply always creates its own demand. So all these economics are known as classical economics. But in Keynesian model, approach is different from classical. Classical assumed some different assumptions, and Keynesian gave modified assumptions, which is much realistic, which is much important and prevalent at present scenario. So in classical model, they assumed that there is a flexible price system. It means prices are more flexible in nature. Classical always assumed that in long run, full employment exists. And full employment is a very simple and very easy to achieve. So long run view is the main assumption of classical model. And in third assumption, here LRAS. LRAS means long run aggregate supply. Long run aggregate supply determines the output level. And according to classical model, long run aggregate supply curve remains always vertical or parallel to the y-axis. But according to Keynesian model, there is a rigidity in prices. It means prices are not too much flexible. It means price can't change very easily. Prices are sometimes rigid in nature, because according to Keynesian model, supply curve is always horizontal or parallel to the x-axis. It means in short run, prices are remains constant or more rigid. So Keynesian approach is based on short run time period, but classical model is based on long time period. And according to Keynesian model, aggregate demand AD determines the output. It means Keynesian theory gave more emphasis, more focus on aggregate demand, but classical model gave more importance in their theory aggregate supply. That's why they said that supply creates its own demand. It means whatever we are producing goods and services, immediately they are consumed by consumer, and there is no problem of underproduction and overproduction arises in the economy. So according to classical model, there are three main basic assumptions. One is flexible prices, second is long run view, and third is LRAs always determine the output level. But according to Keynesian model, prices are more rigid in nature, and Keynesian theory is based on short time period, not in long run, and aggregate demand mainly determines the output level. So this is the basic difference between classical versus Keynesian model. Now next is classical economics. What is classical economics? Classical economics is based on some classical economics assumptions. You know that classical economics in which David Ricardo, Adam Smith, Malthus, J.B. Say propounded their theories. The market is perfect and self sustaining according to classical economics, and they assumed that the market automatically adjusted to booms and bursts, means supply remains always equals to demand. They always assume that demand and supply remains always equal. There is no difference, there is no lag in between of supply and demand. It means supply and demand, when both will remain same, then there will be no situation of business cycles like boom, recession, depression, recovery. These stages will not occur. Why? Because supply remains always equals to demand, and prices are more flexible in nature, and they assume that government intervention can only be a detriment to the economy. They assume that if government not interfere in the economy, then economy can run very smoothly. Without the interference of the government, economy can achieve their set targets and economy can run smoothly. And historical perspective, according to historical perspective, classical economics come of age during and after industrialization. And according to Say's law, supply creates its own demand. It means whatever goods and services are produced in the economy, they are consumed by consumer. And consumer always spend their entire money income on goods and services, which is produced by producers. So there will be no problem of underproduction, and overproduction will arise, will occur in the economy. That's why demand and supply remains always equal. So supply creates its own demand. The economy is stimulated when more goods are produced. So this is the main approach which is given by classical economics. Now next is Say's law. When Great Depression occurred in the economy in the whole world at the time of 1929, then Say's theory, Say's law failed. At that time, Keynesian economics gave very important theory, and Keynes gave the solution of this depression period. That's why we can say that Keynesian economics and Keynesian theory is most relevant, most important, and their assumption is more realistic in present world. So Say's law at the time of Great Depression and Keynes. Classical economics in which J.B. Say propounded their theory that supply creates its own demand. It means Say said that supply play very important role in the determination of output. But according to Keynesian theory, demand play very important role instead of supply. So economy, according to Say's law, economy will adjust automatically, and there is a laissez-faire economy it means government intervention is not necessary. And according to Keynesian economics, cyclical unemployment can occur. At the time of depression and recession, unemployment will increase, and at the time of boom, unemployment will decrease. An economy will not correct itself without the interference of the government. It means government intervention is necessary to correct the economy problems. And if we want to run, that economy can run smoothly, but without intervention of the government, economy can't run smoothly. And next is government should actively manage macroeconomic stability. It means government give got great contribution in the management of macroeconomic stability. And at the time of instability, government should actively manage their policies, and government should actively intervene in the activities of the economy. Then economy can overcome this problem. Next is classical economics, in which Say's law of market is the most important market theory. So, according to Say's law, if there is an increase in output, then there will be increase in income level. And if income will increase, then spending will also increase. So, according to Say, as every additional supply creates an additional demand, aggregate supply remains always equals to aggregate demand. What is aggregate demand and what is aggregate supply? Aggregate supply is the total amount of output which is supplied by wholesalers, whole producers of the country. And aggregate demand is the sum total of all country people demand, in which we include four sectors demand like C plus I plus G plus NX. C is consumption, I is investment, G is government expenditure, and NX is net export. So aggregate demand has four components in a four sector economy. If we are taking two sector economy, then there is only two component. One is C and other is I. C is consumption expenditure, I is investment expenditure. If we are taking three sector economy, in which household, firm sector and government sector are included, then we will take the component of aggregate demand is C plus I plus G. And at present, four sector economy is going on in each and every country, because no one is closed economy. Each and every country is open economy. So four sectors mainly exist in each and every country. And these four sectors are: one is household sector, second is farm sector, third is government sector, and fourth is rest of the world. So consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure, and net export. These four are the main components of aggregate demand in a four sector economy. And according to Say or JB Say, as every additional supply creates an additional demand, aggregate supply remains always equals to aggregate demand, and there can be now no general overproduction. It means there will be no problem of underproduction, and overproduction will arise in the economy. When aggregate demand and aggregate supply remains always equal, then no problem of depression, recession, and business cycle stages will not occur. But this assumption is unrealistic, not accurate. Classical theory of employment always assumed full employment in a free market system, or in a capitalist economy, or in a laissez-faire economy. According to their views, under perfect competition, unemployment will be temporary, and after some time it will disappear. Even at times, if full employment is not realized, then this will gradually move towards full employment. It means full employment. What is the meaning of this concept of full employment? Full employment means when all country people who are willing to do work, if they get job opportunities, it means country can achieve full employment level. But according to Keynesian theory, full employment is a very rare situation. It cannot be achieved very easily because full employment we can't achieve. At the level of full employment, 5 to 6% voluntary unemployment can be exist. Because if people are voluntarily unemployed, they don't want to do any work, they are not willing to do work, then how can you give employment to those people who are not willing to do any work? So at the level of full employment, voluntary unemployment can be exist. So full employment is not a very simple situation and is not a very easy to achieve. At present, no one country, either it may be developed or underdeveloped or less developed or developing, full employment does not exist at present in any economies or in any country. But according to classical economics, they assumed that full employment in the free market system is always exist. And at the level of full employment, all country people get job opportunities. But according to Keynesian theory, full employment is a very rare situation, and at the level of full employment, 5 to 6% unemployment may be exist. Now, classical theory of employment, which is very important to understand, because when you know about classical theory of employment, then you can uh, make the difference between classical theory of employment and Keynesian theory of employment. And you can say that which theory of employment is more superior and more realistic in present world. So classical theory of income and employment, the entire economic premise of the classical economics was based on the assumption of full employment of labor and other economic resources. It means they always assumed that full employment exists in each and every country, and all country people are fully employed. They were of the opinion that the economy operates in the stable equilibrium situation in the long run, and if any deviation occur, there too was regarded as abnormal. It means where demand curve and supply curve intersect each other, here wage rate is determined, and at the level of this equilibrium point, labor will be employed. This number is n0. So in this classical theory of employment, full employment can be achieved where demand curve and supply curve intersect each other. And demand curve for labor is always downward sloping curve because it shows inverse relationship between wage rate and demand for labor. If wages increases, demand for labor will fall. And if wages falls, demand for labor will rise. And supply curve is always upward sloping curve because we know that at higher wages, labor will be willing to do more work, supply of labor will rise, and at lower wage, supply of labor will fall. So if there is a positive relationship between wage rate and supply of labor, so curve will be upward sloping where both curve intersect each other. Here wage rate is determined, and we can calculate real wages if we divide wages to price level, then we can get real wage rate. So W by P is the real wage rate. Wages divided by price level. So if wages divided by price level, then we can get real wage rate. So equilibrium point will give us equilibrium wage rate and the determination of employment and output level according to this classical theory of employment. Now next is this is the curve of demand for labor and supply of labor curve. When both curve intersect each other, wage rate is determined, and this wage rate is real wage rate if wages are divided by price level. And the number of labor who is employed at this equilibrium point is L0. Now, this next curve is presenting here, which is showing that production function. You know that production function is the technical relationship between input and output. Whatever input we are using for the production of goods and services, they will give us output level. So here Q is representing output level and it is the function of input. Here K is capital and L is labor. So if we use these two main inputs, capital and labor, then we can get output level. So total production curve is always start from the origin and it is upward sloping curve in the beginning, then it will become maximum and at last it start falling. Because total production, when we use some factors fixed with other factors variable, if we take the different combinations of fixed and variable factor, then in the beginning production will definitely increase. After that production will become maximum and at last production will start falling. This is known as law of variable proportion. So production functions show technical relationship between input and output, and where full employment level is determined according to classical economics. Full employment is always determined when demand curve and supply curve intersect each other, and here this at this equilibrium point and production function curve, this is the level of full employment. Now next is here ND is demand for labor and NS is supply of workers. Both curve intersect each other. Equilibrium point is determined according to classical economics. Supply curve remains always vertical parallel to the y-axis because they assume that prices are more flexible in nature and they assume long time period is that time period in which prices can change, but if we have achieved full employment level then nothing will increase, like income level will not increase, output will not increase, and employment level already we have achieved full employment, then employment level can't increase. It means only prices will increase. So, according to classical economics, if we have assumed that long time period assumption and full employment assumption, then aggregate supply curve will be in shape of vertical or parallel to the y-axis. And this third curve is showing production function curve. And next curve is here S is saving and I is investment. Where saving curve, which is upward sloping curve, and investment, which is negatively related with rate of interest, is always downward sloping curve. Where saving and investment curve intersect each other, rate of interest is determined on that point. If saving increases, investment will also increase and new equilibrium point we will achieve. So real wages can be estimated by dividing money wages or nominal wages divided by price level. So this is the classical theory of employment diagram. Now next is classical model. According to this, where aggregate supply is vertical curve and aggregate demand is downward sloping curve, where both curve intersect each other. Here price level is determined and income and output level will also determine. According to classical economics, this is the full employment situation, and full employment is a very simple situation. It can be achieved very easily according to classical theorist. But supply curve will remain always vertical and demand curve will be always downward sloping curve. AD is aggregate demand and AS is aggregate supply. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, price level will also determined and economic output level will also determined, which is known as real GDP. Real GDP is that GDP which is estimated on the basis of constant year prices or base year prices, which is the true indicator of economic growth and welfare. Now, next is Keynesian economics. Now, we have discussed about classical theory of employment, and next we will discuss about Keynesian economics. You know that there is a great contribution in macroeconomics which is given by J.M. Keynes. Keynesian economics was developed during the Great Depression period. And Great Depression period is known as 1929 to 33 time period is known as Great Depression period. Keynesian theory provided an explanation for the severe and prolonged unemployment of the 1930s. During the time period of depression, USA and UK suffered a problem of unemployment. Due to depression, near about 17 to 20% people were unemployed in USA and UK. And to solve their problem, classical theory failed to solve their problem, but J.M. Keynes gave the theory of employment which solved the problem of depression and problem of unemployment, which was mainly prevailing in two main countries like USA and UK. So Keynes argued that wages and prices are not highly flexible. According to Keynes, wages and prices are rigid in nature, particularly in a downward direction. Thus, he did not think changes in price and rate of interest would directly affect the economy and back to full employment. And national income means the total money income or total money value of all final goods and services which are produced by the normal resident of a country in an accounting year. So, according to Keynesian theory, wages and prices are not fully flexible, but according to classical economics, wages are fully flexible, prices are more flexible in nature. That's why supply curve remains always vertical, in which prices can change, but output, income, and employment will not change. But according to Keynes, wages and prices are highly inflexible. Now, next is Keynesian economics. Who is John Maynard Keynes? John Maynard Keynes is Cambridge University economics, and the main central principle of his theory is that the economy often operates at less than full employment. Market system does not self-adjust. It means without the interference of the government, economy cannot achieve full employment and can't run all economic activities smoothly. So according to John Maynard Keynes, the economy often operates at less than full employment, means full employment is not a very easy situation, very easy thing which can be achieved very easily in all countries. Full employment is a rare situation, and at the level of full employment, 5 to 6% unemployment may be exist according to Keynesian approach. And government intervention is also very necessary to operate economic activities smoothly. Now, next is Keynesian economics. According to Keynesian economics, there is an imperfect market situation exists in the economy, and which is not always self-sustaining, and equilibrium may include underemployment and unemployment and negative growth also. And consumers' income stimulate demand, which causes economic growth. As well as income of the consumer increases, their purchasing power will also increase. Their capacity to produce and their capacity to demand for goods and services will also increase. If consumer will demand more for goods and services, then producer will encourage to produce more goods. In this situation, economy will grow. So economic growth depends upon aggregate demand, not on aggregate supply. Classical economics gave more emphasis on aggregate supply. That's why they said that supply creates its own demand. But Keynesian economics gave the theory of aggregate demand. It is mainly based on the demand of the consumers, which is depend upon income level of the consumer. So consumer income stimulates demand, which causes economic growth. When economic growth is lacking, the government should stimulate demand. It means government intervention is very important, and without the intervention of the government, economy can't increase the production level and economic growth cannot be achieved. Next is Keynesian ideas. An understanding of Keynesian ideas can be helpful in evaluating macroeconomic stability in terms of prices, jobs, and income. Keynesian believe that free market are volatile and not always self-correcting in the event of external shock, and demand and supply will not remain always equal. Demand may be greater than supply and supply may be greater than demand. But according to classical economics, demand and supply remains always equal, which is the unrealistic assumption because we are not living in a static world. At present, economy is dynamic. Everything is changing. Then how we can say that demand and supply remains always equal? If demand and supply remains always equal, then there will be no fluctuation in price will occur. So demand may be increased than supply and may be less than supply. And the free market system is prone to lengthy periods of recession and depression. If there is a free market system or laissez-faire economy or without the interference of the government, then there will be a lengthy time period of recession and depression. Then who will solve this problem of business cycles, which mainly occur according to the time period or different time periods in the situation of when demand is greater than supply or when supply is greater than demand. If supply is more than demand, then depression will occur. And if demand is more than supply, then boom situation will occur in the economy. And economies can remain stuck in an underemployment equilibrium. According to Keynesian approach, underemployment always exists in the economy. Full employment will not always exist in the economies. So, in a world of stagnation or depression, direct state intervention may be essential to restore confidence and lift demand. So, Keynes was one of the first economists to criticize the profession for adhering to unrealistic assumptions, which was given by classical economists. Keynesian model, according to Keynesian model, supply is always upward sloping curve and which shows direct and positive relationship between price and output level as well as price increases, supply will increase. If price falls, supply will falls. And aggregate demand is always downward sloping curve which shows inverse relationship between price and aggregate demand. At higher price, demand will less, and at lower price, demand will be higher. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is achieved. At this equilibrium point, we can determine the price level and output level. So according to Keynesian model, supply will not be vertical or parallel to the y-axis. It may be horizontal line, which is the extreme situation, but generally aggregate supply curve is always upward sloping curve. The aggregate demand curve represent consumers, investors, government, and net exports in an open economy. These four are the main components of aggregate demand. In a four sector economy where farm sector, household sector, government sector, and rest of the world sector exist, if we take these four components in aggregate demand, then the equation will be y is equals to c plus I plus g plus net export. So aggregate demand always represent these four sectors income or four sectors expenditures in an open economy. And aggregate demand curve is downward sloping curve. And aggregate supply curve represent the productive ability of the economy. This simple model can be used to see how changes in the productive ability of the economy or the changes in consumption, investment, government expenditures, and taxation or international trade can affect the whole economy. GDP is gross domestic product, which is the sum total of all final goods and services which are produced in a domestic territory in an accounting year. Unemployment is a problem when people are willing to do work at a prevailing wage rate but not getting any job opportunities, then unemployment problem will arise. And inflation is a situation when there is a persistent or continuous rise in price level. So all these four components of the aggregate demand can affect the whole economy's GDP, whole economy's problem of unemployment and problem of inflation. So where aggregate demand curve and aggregate supply curve intersect each other, then macroeconomic equilibrium can be achieved. So the intersection of AD and AS represents the general equilibrium of the macroeconomy. Next is here, this is the curve of aggregate demand. Aggregate demand curve may be a linear demand curve or downward sloping straight line demand curve, and it may be non-linear or in a curve shape. And SRAS is showing short run aggregate supply curve. And at the point of intersection, price level is determined, and on x-axis always we take real GDP, and real GDP can also determine with the help of the intersection of AD and AS curve. Now comparison between classical and Keynesian theories. First of all, the equilibrium at full employment. According to classical theory, the economy can only be in a state of equilibrium at full employment level. According to classical economics, full employment can be achieved where aggregate demand and aggregate supply both curve intersect each other. This equilibrium point is known as full employment point according to classical approach. And any deviation from full employment would be of short period. But in long period, economy will always in the position of full employment. But according to Keynesian theory, is the viewpoint that an economy can be in equilibrium even at less than full employment level. There is a small possibility of full employment in a country because Keynes assumed that in short period full employment is a very rare situation to achieve. So economy equilibrium can be achieved at the level of underemployment or less than full employment. Next is criticism of Keynesian theory of employment. You know that each and everything has some pros and cons, same as Keynesian theory has some criticism and limitations. The concept of equilibrium is self contradictory, like economy equilibrium was possible in less than full employment. Many economists have criticized this view of Keynes. According to them, equilibrium can be possible when there is full employment in the employment level and full utilization of resources. Keynesian economics analysis is mainly a static analysis. He did not clarify that when we move from one position to equilibrium and to the other, how and in what way investment undergoes a change. Keynesian theory is a short run economic analysis having no concerns with long time period. You know that Keynesian theory is based on short run assumption. Keynesian theory not clarified the situation of that when we move from one position to another position and what is the way how investment undergoes a change. And the concept of equilibrium is also a self-contradictory economy equilibrium can be possible at less than full employment level, but many economists criticized this view of J.M. Keynes. They said that equilibrium can be possible when there is a full employment and full utilization of resources. Now, next is models for income determination. National income can be determined in a two-sector economy, in a three-sector economy, and in a four-sector economy. There are different models of national income determination. And Keynes, according to Keynes, the book of the Keynesian economics, which was published in 1936, the name of this book is the General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, which was presented by J.M. Keynes at the time of Depression period. And in 1936, Keynes written his book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, in which Keynes propounded that how national income can be determined in a two-sector economy and in a three-sector economy and in a four-sector economy. Now, determination of equilibrium, level of income, output and employment by aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach. When we determine the equilibrium level in a two-sector economy, then we take only consumption expenditure and investment expenditure as a component of aggregate demand. And in aggregate supply, there is always two components, which is consumption expenditure and saving. Aggregate supply line will always be a 45-degree line. And aggregate demand can always start from the y-axis, not from the origin, because demand can never be zero. You know that each and every person will consume whatever amount of goods and services for their survival, but demand can never be zero. If income level is zero, but demand can never be zero. That's why demand curve always start from the y-axis, not from the origin. But supply may be zero and start from the origin, because if we don't have any income, then output level will be zero. As well as income rises, output level will rise. So aggregate supply line will be a 45-degree line, which shows direct and proportionate relationship between price and or aggregate supply and income level. And aggregate demand curve always start from the y-axis, because demand can never be zero, where both curve in aggregate demand in a two-sector economy, there is a two component C and I. So C plus I is the component of aggregate demand in a two-sector economy, and C plus S is the component of aggregate supply in all types of economies like two-sector, three-sector, and in a four-sector economy. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, if we join a line to the x-axis, then national income will be determined at this point. So this is the equilibrium point, and here national income, output, and employment is determined with the help of aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve intersection. This OY is the equilibrium level of national income or output or employment. So this is the determination of national income in a two-sector economy. Now, here is national income determination approaches. National income can be determined with the help of two approaches. Either it may be in a two-sector economy, or in a three-sector economy, or in a four-sector economy. Here, aggregate demand and aggregate supply is the first approach of determining national income, and another approach is saving and investment. In this first diagram, here aggregate supply curve is a 45-degree line, which we can denote by Y or aggregate supply. And it shows always direct and proportionate relationship between income and output level. And aggregate demand curve always start from the y-axis, not from the origin, because demand can never be zero. And aggregate demand has two components, C and I, because we are taking two-sector economy. Where aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined. Here AD is equals to AS. At this equilibrium point, income level is determined OY. If we join this line or extend this line to another curve, in another curve we are taking investment line, which is always known as autonomous investment, horizontal line, because autonomous investment is that investment which is made by government. And if government earn any income or not, whatever level of income and output level, investment will remain same or constant. So autonomous investment is the minimum level of investment which is invested by the government for the welfare of the country people. So investment curve will be always horizontal line or parallel to the x-axis, which is known as autonomous investment. And saving curve always start from the below point of the origin, because in the beginning saving is always negative. After that saving will become zero, and at last saving start rising. Where saving intersect investment curve, equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, national income is determined OY. Here S is equals to I. So in these two diagrams, there are two approaches we are discussing here which can determine national income, output, and employment. So national income can be determined with the help of two approaches. One is aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach, and second is saving and investment approach. Saving is that part of our money income which is not spent on consumption. So saving can be estimated by taking the difference between income and consumption. Saving is equals to y minus c. And at the equilibrium point where AD is equals to AS and S is equals to I, national income is determined OY. So these are the two approaches of national income determination, and we can show these approaches with the help of these diagrams. Now next is aggregate expenditure. Aggregate expenditure, you know that in a four sector economy, we include four components of the aggregate demand like consumption expenditure. C is representing consumption. I is representing investment. G is government expenditure. And X minus M is export minus import. Export minus import is showing net export. Now aggregate expenditure is not same as GDP. AE represent planned spending and GDP represent actual spending or output. So aggregate expenditure is the planned expenditure and GDP is the real GDP or actual spending or output. So aggregate expenditure is equals the summation of C, I, G and net export in a four sector economy. Now, in a four-sector economy, how we can achieve full employment? We can achieve national income and output level. National income and output level can be achieved where aggregate demand curve and aggregate supply curve intersect each other. Here, this is the diagram. On x-axis, we are taking national income or real GDP, and on y-axis we have taken the components of aggregate demand like C plus I plus G plus net export, and aggregate supply, you know that it is always 45-degree line. 45-degree line is showing positive and direct relationship or proportionate relationship between income and output level. And next this line is C. This curve is this line is showing a consumption function. Consumption line always start from the y-axis, not from the origin, because consumption always depends upon income and consumption can never be zero. At zero level of income, consumer will definitely consume goods and services for their survival. So consumption can never be zero. And consumption equation is A plus BY. Here A is autonomous consumption, B is showing MPC, marginal propensity to consume, which is the ratio of change in consumption due to change in income level, and Y means income. So C is equals to A plus BY. Consumption function is equals to autonomous consumption plus marginal propensity to consume, which is also depends upon the level of income. And if we take aggregate demand, then aggregate demand will include four components of the four sector economy like C plus I plus G plus NX. And then we will draw a parallel line which is parallel to the consumption function line, and it will be above this line because aggregate demand here is showing the four components of aggregate demand. So where aggregate demand curve and 45-degree line intersect each other, this is the equilibrium point. Here R point is the equilibrium point where both curve intersect each other, and Y3 is the level of income which is determined in a four sector economy. Now, difference between classical and Keynesian economics. Classical follow the basic assumptions that economy is always at the level of full employment. Wages and prices are more flexible in nature. There is no need of government intervention, and there is no need of fiscal and monetary policies. And they assume that economy is laissez-faire economy or invisible hand economy or market economy, which is self-correctable, self-adjustable without interference of the government. And aggregate supply is a vertical line or vertical curve according to classical. So any rise in aggregate demand will increase only price, not output level. But Keynesian follow the basic assumptions that economy may not be in full employment in short time period, and wages are more rigid and prices are sticky in nature. And fiscal and monetary both policies are needed to correct the disequilibrium or improve the efficiency of the economy. It means Keynesian believed that government intervention and their policies like monetary policy and fiscal policy are very necessary to correct the disequilibrium situations of the economy, and government intervention can definitely improve the efficiency of the economy. So these are the basic difference between classical and Keynesian economics views. Now we can conclude from today's session that the impact of any change in aggregate demand on output and the price level depends upon the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So, according to the Keynesian economics or Keynesian theory, if aggregate supply is upward sloping curve, then both output and price level will increase. Here, demand curve is downward sloping curve and supply curve is upward sloping curve. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined, and at this equilibrium point, income level will also determine. According to Keynesian economics, aggregate supply in a in an extreme situation, it will be a horizontal line, but generally when we determine the macroeconomic equilibrium, then aggregate supply curve will be a upward sloping line, and aggregate demand curve will always be a downward sloping curve. And where both curve intersect each other, then equilibrium can be determined. So according to classical and Keynesian, the approaches are different. They both explained the theory of income and employment, but their assumptions, their views to express these theories are totally different. And classical theory failed to solve the problem of depression, which mainly occurred in 1929 in whole world. At that time, when unemployment was widespread and unemployment problem occurred, then classical theory, in which they assumed that demand and supply remains always equal. If demand and supply remains always equal, then there will be no problem of underproduction and overproduction will arise. Then when problem of depression occurred in the economy, then classical theory failed to solve this problem. Then J.M. Keynes gave the theory of income and employment and solved the problem of depression in USA and UK and propounded the theory of income and employment, which is more realistic, and at present this theory is more relevant. So in today's session we have discussed about classical and Keynesian system and how national income is determined in a two sector economy, in a three sector economy, and in a four sector economy with the help of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So in next session, we will discuss about another topic of this macroeconomics. Thank you.